on Inside Story.
So when did you start thinking about killing your parents?
Face to face with a monster.
You should have sent me to a mental hospital.
He tried to massacre his whole family.
He shot all of us. Why?
Then in Perth, an obsessive husband
Love you lots.
who stabbed his wife 18 times.
I can't help the image of her last moments passing through my mind.
2 unforgivable crimes with the same unforgettable sequel.
Yes, he murdered my child, but I love him and I have compassion for him.
Love and forgiveness. Hello, I'm Layla McKinnon. Welcome to Inside Story. A mother shattered by the murder of her daughter, viciously stabbed to death. A father who lost his wife and son, devastated when he discovers his other son masterminded the whole thing. You'd understand if these two people were bitter, if they raged and wanted revenge. But what if they showed extraordinary compassion? What if they were able to forgive the killers? Jane Azzopardi's been investigating how they found that inner strength.
Thanks, Layla. Yes, tonight we're going to meet 2 truly remarkable people. A mum who says she has love and compassion for the man who murdered her daughter, and a father who's been able to forgive his son for an unthinkable family tragedy. And when you see just how horrific and how premeditated these murders were, it beggars belief that they were able to forgive, and certainly they'll never forget.
Yes, Jane, as we'll see, 2 remarkable people.
A young woman loving her life as a first-time mum, stabbed to death at home. Killed by the man she loved.
I just love you, darling. This is all just meant to be.
He was a big-talking salesman who sold her the dream.
I can't wait to start a family together.
But not long after they were married, he began to feel torn between life with his wife and the tug of his own family.
Dad's my rock. And my mum is just a peacemaker.
As the pressure from his family increased, his behaviour changed.
Well, he wasn't nice anymore. He stopped the pretense, if you like.
But no one could have predicted what was to come. Dimitrios Tsakiris spiralled out of control and ferociously murdered his wife, Corinne.
I just couldn't believe that she could do anything to anybody that would make them want to kill her.
It was a brutal, nasty crime, which makes it even more astonishing to hear Corinne's mother say she has forgiven her son-in-law for murdering her daughter.
I love him and I have compassion for him, and perhaps that is forgiveness. So yes, he murdered my child, but on the other hand, he was a severely damaged child himself.
That story to come. And later in the show, you'll meet a father whose whole family was gunned down in their own home.
One of my neighbors came running up and he knelt by me and said, "Oh, Kent, what happened? What happened?" I said, "They've shot all of us and I don't know why."
What makes this murder so extraordinary is the killer was Kent's son, his own flesh and blood.
He said, "You guys are either wrong or my son is a monster." And as politely as I could tell him, I said, "Well, your son's a monster."
Everybody believed that Bart was the mask that he presented. Nobody saw behind it.
And later, we'll take you inside a Texas prison to meet Bart Whitaker, the man who killed his mother and brother and attempted to murder his father.
So when did you start thinking about killing your parents?
You know, I don't actually know. I mean, it was not just this eureka moment.
But first, winter 2005 at Victoria's Dandenongs, where Corinne and Dimitrios Tsakiris chose to marry.
Declare my love for you. I invite you to share my life as my wife.
But that life would be short-lived. Corinne was a bright, beautiful woman whose dream was to get married and raise a family. Dimitrios was an ambitious, charismatic salesman with strong family ties. Tonight, you'll hear how in 2.5 short years, that dream turned into a nightmare, and how this groom would viciously bash and murder the woman he promised to love. But nothing was amiss at the wedding.
You absolutely mean the world to me.
I'm looking forward to spending all of my time with you and having babies and having raising a family and seeing them grow up and us grow all together.
Or was it? In his speech, Dimitrios said he loved his wife and was very happy.
I love you very, very much. I love para puli. And I'm very happy.
But the emotion and passion were reserved for his parents.
The two most beautiful people in the world are on that table there, and they are just wonderful.
The most beautiful people in the world. Not his bride, his parents.
Long life and many children.
Coming up on Inside Story,
Love you lots.
the warning signs that could have saved Corinne.
There was just something not quite right.
In March 2008, Corinne Sekiris was savagely murdered by her husband of 2.5 years, Dimitrios. Corinne was raised in Perth in the 70s and 80s. She was close to her siblings, had long-lasting friendships, and her boyfriends came and went.
She was extremely capable, very creative, very intelligent, and I reckon that might have been threatening to some people.
She was just a really good listener and very caring.
Barbara Reid met Corinne when Corinne moved to Melbourne. The two became great friends, sharing a passion for shopping.
So what kind of shopper was she?
Oh, a bit of a bargain shopper, never pay full price for anything. One of the beautiful things about our friendship was she was my confidant.
When you met her, what did she want to do with her life?
She really, really wanted a family. She wanted to be married and she wanted to have a family.
And it seemed Dimitrios Sekiris was looking for the same things when he met Corinne at a work Christmas party in 2003.
She was pretty well swept off her feet. Met this guy and, he really likes me, and it was all pretty full on.
Within months, Corinne took her new man to Perth to meet her family.
Oh, I thought he was marvellous. Yes. I thought he was very thoughtful and considerate, and it looked as if he loved her.
But not everyone fell for Dimitrios's charm. Barbara found his smooth-talking ways a bit too well-rehearsed.
Almost like a used car salesman, I suppose. Used your name 20 times in a sentence, so what do you think, Barb? And, oh, Barb, what about that? And it was like he'd known you for 20 years, but he'd just met you.
Sometimes people use what we call superficial charm. So the charm's there, but we can see through the cracks. We can see that it's just on the surface.
David Martin is a forensic psychologist at the University of Western Sydney.
And probably part of our instinct says, this person's trying something on me. They're trying to manipulate me. And we probably then sort of think, well, that's phony, and we feel uncomfortable.
Have you got a cutthroat?
And there were some other things that worried Barb.
He monopolised all her time with him and his family. Her friends became very much a thing on the edges.
It sounds to me like you never trusted him.
I just think that she had so much to offer. He certainly wasn't the right person for her to be with. There was just something not quite right.
Have a great day, everyone.
Barbara's concerns were strong enough that she felt she had to discuss them with Corinne.
We questioned her on a number of different levels, whether she was doing the right thing, whether she was a little bit blinded by the charisma. She just seemed to be under his spell.
The first time Corinne's mum thought things may not have been as rosy as they appeared was when she went to Melbourne for the engagement party.
The men stood around the keg and the women spent their time on their own. And I thought, This is so different to the way we are. How is Corinne going to fit into that culture?
The men drank to excess and the women were kept in their places.
That's when I first got an inkling that what sort of background he came from, and I started to have some grave concerns.
But Corinne was chasing her storybook ending, and she seemed happy. The 31-year-old had waited a long time for her big day, and on the 6th of August 2005, that day arrived.
When you'll be loyal and honest and comfort her for the rest of your life.
I will. Now husband and wife.
The wedding was everything they'd hoped for, surrounded by people they loved, who loved them. It couldn't have been better.
That was easy. I'm looking forward to going away and having babies together and living the rest of our lives together.
Corinne could never have imagined the rest of her life would be less than 3 years.
So baby, let's go and travel the world, come back, have a family, and just keep on going. Love you lots. Hey, I'm going to make love to my wife.
Straight after the wedding, Corinne and Dimitrios went on a 3-month honeymoon, spending time with his family in Greece.
And when she came back from her honeymoon, I noticed a visible shift in her as a person. I think she just started to feel more and more pressure from his family wanting to be in their pocket all the time, and she wasn't liking that.
In the Tsakiris household, Dimitrios was the shining star, and there was pressure on him to always be available to his extended family.
The relationship between them was one of dependent parents, but then also dependent children.
In enmeshed families, no one is an individual. The family is the unit, the main unit. And they all work very well together, but if one decides or needs to leave, then the system comes together to pull that person back in. That's why it's enmeshed.
Corinne knew how tight-knit the family were, but she and Dimitrios had openly discussed their future plans.
The deal was that they'd get married, they'd live here, but once they started a family, they would return to Perth. There was never any secret about that, so when she got pregnant, that's where they went. They went straight back to Perth.
Corinne wanted to raise her family here in Perth, where she grew up, while Dimitrios and his family were hell-bent on a return to Melbourne. It became a huge problem.
And he told me this himself. He said his family was struggling without him being here in Melbourne. His mother was distraught by it. He was putting pressure on Corinne to come back to Melbourne, and that was never the deal.
Coming up, the frenzied attack, but then this remarkable act of forgiveness.
I love him and I have compassion for him.
Corinne and Dimitrios were both anticipating a wonderful life together when they married in 2005. But it wouldn't be long before this love story took a grave turn and became a living nightmare. Corinne and Dimitrios made no secret of their desire to start a family, and their precious daughter Lara was born just 1 year after they were married. While Dimitrios was a doting father, he wasn't prepared to see so much of his wife's love and attention lavished upon their adorable baby girl. Lara's birth was the beginning of the end.
She asked me if I'd noticed any difference in Dimitrios since she'd had Lara. I always think what would have happened if I'd put my arms around her and said, well, darling, you know, I've noticed that things are not too good. How about you and Lara come and stay with us for a while?
I think he felt very jealous of her time being monopolised by Lara. He'd come home all the time. She felt very strangled, almost like he was checking up on her every day.
Suddenly the man is no longer the potential centre of his wife's life. A very demanding new presence comes in and takes away the limelight from the husband. Most husbands adapt to that, and obviously they love their children and they cope. But some can't, and they become very resentful.
In March 2008, just a couple of weeks before she was murdered, Corinne, Dimitrios and their 1-year-old daughter Lara had a 10-day trip to Melbourne. While Corinne wasn't thrilled to be staying with her in-laws, she was hoping for some one-on-one time with her friend Barbara to discuss her husband's bizarre behaviour.
He kept saying things through that visit like, I don't know what I'd do without my girls. I'm saying to him, well, what do you mean you don't know what you'll do without your girls? Oh, I just don't know what I'd do without them. I said, well, why would you be saying that? What's going to happen to them? He seemed to be, anxious or quite stressed at the very least.
Barbara didn't understand Dimitrios's odd behaviour, but she was much more concerned by how troubled her friend was.
And she was clearly unhappy, very unhappy. And it was difficult to get time with her alone. He didn't want her to take Lara. And she didn't want to leave Lara at his parents' house with them.
Why not?
She just didn't think that they were able to care for her. She felt threatened by them. She didn't want her to be left with people that were drinking and cigarette smoking and stuff like that.
But Corinne did leave her baby with Dimitrios and his family and managed to discuss her predicament with Barbara whilst she was in Melbourne.
She definitely wasn't giving in and coming back to Melbourne. She wanted to be in Perth, and she was just really not in a good place with the whole relationship.
When Barbara dropped Corinne back to her in-laws' place, she clearly remembers saying goodbye in what was to be the last time she would ever see her friend alive.
And I got out of the car and I hugged her and I said, oh, I think you need to fasten your seatbelt. I think you're in for a fairly rough ride.
10 days later, Corinne was dead. Corinne was murdered in a brutal and sustained attack at home in the upmarket suburb of Booragoon. Her husband took his time killing her. First, he hit her so hard it knocked out her 4 front teeth, and then he stabbed her 18 times. Their 1-year-old daughter was at home when it happened. After the horrific act, Dimitrios phoned Corinne's brother.
He called Lane and said, come and get Lara, I've skitzed out.
Lane found his brother-in-law outside with a knife in his hand, covered in Corinne's blood. He looked dazed and confused and said, I murdered your sister. Dimitrios lamely poked himself with the knife a couple of times. Lane calmly suggested Dimitrios put on another shirt. So Dimitrios put down the knife and went inside to change. Lane picked up the knife and called for help. When Dimitrios walked back outside, he had baby Lara in his arms like everything was normal.
Let's go outside, come on. It's all right.
Ambulance and police were soon on the scene. Dimitrios was taken to Fremantle Hospital before being transferred to the Franklin Centre, the maximum security psychiatric facility at Greylands Hospital. Barbara had left a couple of messages for Corinne to call her. So when she received a call from one of Corinne's Perth friends, she knew something must have happened.
I said to her, oh, don't tell me that Dimitrios has committed suicide. And she said, no, it's worse. And I said, what? She said, he's murdered her. And I just couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. It was just, shocking.
I can't help the image of her last moments passing through my mind.
During his trial, psychiatric reports were produced saying Dimitrios had been suffering a severe depressive illness at the time of the murder, but had since fully recovered. Did he give any explanation as to why he did it?
He says he went to bed at night and woke up beside her body, all bloodied. He says he doesn't remember.
What do you think of that?
I don't believe him.
June believes Dimitrios's depression masked another condition.
I mean, people suffer depression and anxiety, but they don't go out and have the capacity to actually, just having the ability to put a knife into another body, to most of us is just abhorrent.
The control issues, the personality issues, the family issues, the conflicts, the tensions, they're the main motivators. The depression, anxiety might have been maybe some fuel onto the fire, but the fire was elsewhere.
Do you think Dimitrios loved Corinne?
No. Not for a moment.
Never?
No. I don't believe for a second that he knows what love is.
But incredibly, almost unbelievably, not only does June claim to have an understanding of her daughter's killer, but she also forgives him.
I love him and I have compassion for him. What he did is not only not okay, it's absolutely horrific and almost unforgivable. But I have to forgive, if you like, in order that he doesn't control me, because if I lived with any ill feeling, any negative emotions involving him, he would still be running my life. And I'm determined that's not going to happen.
Dimitrios Tsakiris was convicted of murder. He is serving a life sentence with a non-parole period of 12 years.
Still to come on Inside Story, a family gunned down.
He shot all of us. Why? Why?
A father forced to face the truth.
I said, well, your son's a monster.
The mastermind was his own son.
Should have sent me to a mental hospital.
Kent Whitaker is a most unusual man. He was able to forgive the gunman who shot his wife and son before the killer was even named. But then came one more devastating blow to really test his compassion. The murder was a cold-blooded plot, and the mastermind was his other son, Bart.
Sugarland, Texas, where families come to live the sweet life.
Just your typical nice community. In the past, Sugarland has been recognized as one of the safest cities in America.
And it was, until December 2003.
One subject right now is shot in the arm. Apparently the whole family's been shot.
When a cold-blooded killer shot all 4 members of this picture-perfect family. 2 were murdered. The other 2 forced to face uncertain futures. This story begins in the early 70s when Kent Whitaker met Trisha Bartlett on a blind date.
I wasn't expecting it to be anything special, but she was beautiful. And I was just so surprised that a blind date would be this cute. We were married, I think, 2.5 years when Bart came along. But we were just tickled about it. We were very happy. And Kevin came along 4 years later, and we were very happy.
Bart, go down the street.
As Bart Whitaker and his little brother Kevin got older, the vast differences in their personalities became evident.
Bart was always very intelligent and could carry on an intelligent conversation with anybody. Kevin was more fun. He was funnier. Kevin was everybody's best friend. Bart was just an average athlete. Kevin was a gifted athlete.
Were you a happy family? Did the boys get along?
Yeah, we were a very happy family. The 4 of us did a lot of things together.
But Bart was hiding a terrible secret. He was playing a role, pretending to be a good son. Kent and Trisha Whitaker had no idea of the darkness that lurked behind the mask Bart wore. Do you feel like you knew your son?
Yes, both of us felt like we knew our children very well. sometimes you're wrong.
And this time they were terribly wrong. By the time he was 21, Bart was a master of deception and was leading a double life. Bart's parents believed he was going to university, so they bought him a home inside this gated community. It was meant to become Kent and Trisha's holiday house when he graduated. Instead, this is where Bart partied and did drugs with his roommate Chris Brashear and their friend Stephen Champagne, and where over several months they cold-heartedly plotted and planned the vicious murders of Bart's unsuspecting family. And that plan was about to be played out. December 10, 2003. Bart's unsuspecting family thought it was a night of celebration for the Whitakers. They believed Bart was about to graduate.
I mean, your child graduates from college. That's a huge thing, and we were really looking forward to it.
Bart's parents presented him with a Rolex watch. Happy snaps were taken to mark the occasion. Afterwards, the Whitakers came here to one of their favourite restaurants, Pappadeaux's.
Yeah, this is where we came for the celebration dinner. It wasn't really a celebration.
How was he acting at that dinner?
Bart was just being, his usual self. Bart was happy.
And yet he knew what was going to happen when you got home.
Yeah, he knew.
The Whitakers left the restaurant. Bart's friend, Stephen Champagne, had been watching and waiting. He phoned their accomplice, Chris Brashear, who was in position. The 5-minute drive home was filled with laughter.
Kevin had been driving, so he led the way to the front door, and Bart ran down the driveway to retrieve his cell phone from his car, which was parked on the street. Kevin opened the door, walked inside, and there was a loud noise. Tricia was right behind him and said, "Oh no," and then there was another loud noise.
No! Shot at point-blank range, 19-year-old Kevin was dead. His 51-year-old mother, Tricia, was dying on the floor beside him.
The idea that there might be a gunman, an assassin in my own house, that was just too bizarre it just never even crossed my mind. The next moment I was hit hard in the right chest and I spun around and I fell back on the porch. My first inclination was to call out to Bart to warn him. But before I could even say anything, I heard a fourth shot from deeper inside the house. He shot all of us. Why? Why?
Kent had been hit in the right shoulder, Bart in the left arm. Both required emergency surgery. Tricia had been airlifted to hospital but died on the way. This was now a double homicide.
They told me that 4 people had been shot, that a family had been shot, and turned it into
Sugarland homicide detective Marshall Slott was on call that night.
The initial information I received was that a family had gone out to dinner and they returned home and had surprised a burglar in their home.
But the detective knew something wasn't right. This had been staged to look like a robbery gone wrong.
Nothing was pulled out of the drawers. There was definitely something unusual about it.
In hospital, still unaware his son was behind the murder plot, Kent was consumed with thoughts of revenge.
You're irrational. All I wanted to do was to hurt them myself, personally.
Kent called on his faith.
I realized he was leading me down the path, wanting me to forgive this nameless, faceless person in the ski mask who'd murdered my wife. And I knew I couldn't do it.
Praying for help, Kent says he experienced something even more bizarre.
A warm, golden glow just flew over me for a couple of seconds. And that in itself scared me. But I knew it was real. And once I got my senses back, I looked at my heart and I realized that all of that anger all of that hatred and the desire to get even with this person, it had disappeared. And in its place, there was a total and complete, miraculous, unexplainable forgiveness for everyone involved. And that scared me too.
Kent had never experienced anything like this before and couldn't wait to tell Bart. But the following day, police also wanted to talk to Bart to ask why he'd been lying about his upcoming graduation.
Bart hadn't been at the university as a student for several years. He had been suspended and put on academic probation during his freshman year. We took that information to Kent, and Kent seemed shocked, but one of the things that he said was that he thought they had conquered that problem. He explained to us that Bart had a problem with lying and had been caught in several lies.
When detectives confronted Bart, he was unfazed.
He goes, yeah, I was wondering when you guys were going to figure that out. And so it started making us really question anything that he was saying.
The deeper they delved, the worse things looked for Bart Whitaker. Going through their records, Sugarland detectives found they had received a call from Texas State Police in 2001, 2 years before the shootings.
They received word that Bart Whitaker was driving down from Waco during the middle of the night to kill his parents.
Back then, when police went and warned the Whitakers, Kent made some calls and told police it was all just a silly misunderstanding. Years later, the prosecution would refer to this event as the second attempt.
Next, on Death Row, confronting the monster.
So when did you start thinking about killing?
On December 10, 2003, Kevin, Tricia, Kent and Bart Whitaker were all gunned down by a masked shooter as they walked through the front door of their family home.
This one right here, the 1122. I put in all of those trees. Now, some of the shrubs they've put in since I moved.
Looks like a beautiful family home.
Oh, it was great.
Initially, Kent had no idea his surviving son, Bart, was involved in the murders. He and Bart moved back into the house after being released from hospital, making police very uncomfortable.
What was it like for you living with him in that house?
Immediately, the police were telling me that I was in danger, that they knew that Bart was responsible for this. And I thought, how in the world could you possibly know that this quick?
They knew because a former school friend of Bart's had gone to police and told them about Bart's earlier plot in 2001 to kill his parents. And his story was eerily similar to the murders.
At the end of that conversation, it definitively pointed to Bart Whitaker as having some hand in the planning and carrying out of the shooting of his family.
In fact, Bart had organised 2 previous attempts to kill his parents. Along with that knowledge, 7 months of DNA testing, surveillance and phone monitoring, detectives had enough information to warn Kent.
We knew at that time, as definitively as we could, that Chris Brashear was the shooter. Stephen Champagne's role was still a little unclear. But Bart's role as the mastermind of this case, of this shooting, of this homicide, this massacre, was very clear. And so that was what gave us the confidence to sit down in front of Kent and say, Kent, your son is responsible for this.
How did he take it?
He said, you guys are either wrong or my son is a monster. As politely as I could tell him, I said, well, your son's a monster. He's responsible for this. All the evidence points to him.
The heat was on, so Bart took off. For $3,000, an acquaintance named Rudy Rios sold Bart his identity and a room in the Rios family home in Cerralvo, Mexico. Bart lived there for 15 months until a $10,000 reward was posted for his capture. The real Rudy Rios then confessed to police and claimed the reward. Bart was caught, and Detective Marshall Slott had one burning question for him.
I said, with the previous plots and this murder, how did you get so many people to go along with your scheme to kill your family? He simply looked at me and said it was easy. That confirmed to me at that point in time that Bart Whitaker viewed people as tools and met what, as a law enforcement professional, understood to be a sociopath.
Bart was brought back to Sugarland Police Station and Kent confronted his son.
The very first thing he said was, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm going to do everything I can to make this as quick and painless as possible for everybody." And I just lost it. I just lost it because he was guilty. He was responsible. There wasn't any room for any questions anymore.
But Kent wasn't about to withdraw his support for his son. He stood by Bart throughout the trial, listening to sickening details of how Bart and his friends Chris Brashear and Stephen Champagne plotted to kill Kent, Tricia and Kevin.
It's important to recognize that forgiving somebody, it isn't justifying what they did. It isn't saying, "I forgive you, so it's all right."
In separate trials, Chris Brashear was sentenced to life in prison for the shootings, while Stephen Champagne gave evidence against Bart and received 15 years. Evidence that helped Bart get convicted and given the death penalty. For the past 7 years, Bart Whitaker has lived here on death row.
So when did you start thinking about killing your parents?
You know, I don't actually know. I mean, it was not just this eureka moment where it just kind of came up, and it was sort of a way of thinking this really awful thing in my head, the worst thing that I could think of, as a way of kind of like venting, you know, if that makes any sense. It wasn't real. It was not a plan or a plot at that point. It was just sort of a way of, you know, shaking my fist at them in my head.
There would be people that think that way about their parents, though, that wouldn't make the jump to say, "I want to kill them."
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, there were 3 attempts that you made. You must have been serious.
I don't actually believe that any one of us, even the last attempt, which was obviously very real, ever actually thought Chris was going to pull that trigger until he did it.
How did you convince these other 2 to go along with your plan?
There was really no convincing required. I think that it's easier for the public to believe that there's this one really evil person that's capable of doing this than to believe that there was this whole cloud of individuals that were perfectly capable with the, you know, comfortable with the idea of murder, because these are randomly selected people, and if you understand what I'm saying, it's easier for them to believe in the monster lurking about in the shadows than to think that every person around the campfire is capable of this.
But it was your family, it was your idea.
Right, and I never stated otherwise.
But you didn't manipulate them?
There's plenty of sorrow to go around on this, and I extend a lot of that to my co-defendants. You know, they're in prison right now because of this situation. I don't absolve them of, you know, complete responsibility of this, but, you know, they wouldn't be here if it weren't for me. We were all really, really miserable human beings, and this was sort of our game of chicken we were playing with each other. How evil could we get, you know?
Do you know how that sounds, though, playing a game of chicken about killing your family?
Yeah, it's awful, right? I get it. You know, I trust me, I get it. And there's so many things that a person in my position can say here, but they all sound like excuses, and I've never done that.
While not making excuses, at the time of the murder, Bart was usually off his head on alcohol and drugs, mostly ice. And since being in prison, psychiatric tests have revealed he suffers from Asperger's, ADD, and psychotic disorders with paranoid, narcissistic, and antisocial features.
Had I known that what was wrong with me was not some sort of spiritual stain or, you know, just black mark on me that I couldn't see, had I known that this was a matter of biochemistry, it would have framed everything differently. I would have been able to look at myself and say, it's not you, it's your brain.
In court, it was claimed Bart wanted to kill his family for insurance money. Bart maintains it was never about money. In his troubled mind, he wanted revenge on his parents for being alive, for being who he was, for not being able to connect with anyone.
I didn't know how to relate to them. They did not know how to relate to me. And They did not even realize there was a deficit in that. That was sort of the problem. I guess that's really the root of all of this, is that I felt like I was drowning in a very public pool and nobody was noticing.
Certainly Bart believes if his parents had given heed to the warning signs of the second attempt in 2001, his mother and brother may still be alive.
It was like, you know, we had this thing with the cops show up at the house and, hey, you know what, your son's plotting to kill you, and it just vanished. You know, it's like, you guys can't even, you should have sent me to a mental hospital. I should have, you know, something, right?
But instead, Bart is being warehoused in isolation on death row until his appeals expire and the state is allowed to execute him. Having just spent an hour with Bart, or Thomas as he now prefers to be known, I'm finding it really hard to reconcile the man I just met with the awful, terrible things that I know he's done. He comes across as extremely intelligent and self-aware, and though both he and his father admit that he's a very good liar, today I believed him.
I believe wholeheartedly that Bart Whitaker's a sociopath. I don't believe he's mentally ill, where he needs medication. Bart Whitaker is highly intelligent.
Do you think I was taken in?
I believe you could have been taken in by Bart Whitaker. He's charming, intelligent, engaging. My personal feeling is that he gave you what you wanted to hear.
Coming up, after all the horror, a new love and a new life for Kent.
Not only do I have a beautiful wife who loves me, a new career, I have a new relationship with my son.
As his son awaits execution.
Good always comes out of evil.
It's been more than 10 years since Bart Whitaker masterminded the plot to execute his family, killing his mother Tricia and brother Kevin.
What you got?
Meanwhile, his father Kent has written a book about his journey with Bart called Murder by Family. And Kent met and married Tanya.
I remember thinking, okay, do I really want to get in to a relationship with someone who's going to have an ongoing situation like this? It's going to affect everyone around me as well. But we were in love, and that's what you do. You stay in it for that.
So I have fallen in love again. I am married. I have a brand new career. I'm able to speak all over the country about forgiveness and about reconciliation and about hope.
I think we ought to just focus on that and talk about, you know, what it would look like to reconcile with people. We work together. We speak together. We do counseling with other people who have forgiveness issues. We love what we do. We're getting to write a book. We've been able to meet with people all over the country who are really pursuing a life beyond bitterness.
Most Fridays, Tanya and Kent go and visit Bart. People have questioned Tanya about why she goes to the prison.
I know a lot about Tricia from Kent. What I know is that if Kent had died and Tricia were still alive, she'd be at that prison every week visiting her boy. And that's something I can do. I can do that out of honor and respect for her and the wife and mother she was, out of love for Kent, and also out of love for Bart. I can't be his mom. I don't want to be his mom. I'm his friend.
They wouldn't have met if it wasn't for you.
Right.
How do you feel about her?
I like her a lot. She's had a really good effect on him, too. So, yeah, she's very genuine.
So could that possibly be something good that's come out of this?
Good, you know, that's whatever your religious beliefs, good always comes out of evil.
Do you think Bart Whitaker deserves to die for what he did?
I believe that the death penalty that Bart Whitaker received is appropriate.
This is where Bart Whitaker will be brought to draw his final breath. Behind these walls is the Texas execution chamber. And watching on behind the glass will be Kent Whitaker, whose heart will be broken by his older son all over again. But with forgiveness in his heart and Tanya by his side, Kent Whitaker's future is looking bright.
One blessing that I thought that I would never have was grandkids. And Tanya has 3 children, and both of her girls have kids. So not only do I have a beautiful wife who loves me, a new career, a new relationship with my son, I have grandchildren. Life is good.
And in Perth, it's been more than 8 years since Dimitrios Tsakiris cold-heartedly killed his wife Corrine. Corrine's mum, June Van Smalen, and her husband have become full-time parents again, raising Corrine's daughter, Lara.
Actually, what her mother did for her in those 16 months was pretty amazing. When she arrived, she knew about 50 nursery rhymes, could count from 1 to 17 and knew the entire alphabet at 16 months.
What's she like now?
She's an incredible person. She's gifted, mainly on the literacy side and the art side. She's beautiful.
Do you think if and when Dimitrios gets out, he will want to have a relationship with Lara?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yep.
How do you feel about that?
Well, hopefully that'll be up to Lara. When she's old enough, she will have to make up her own mind. The main thing is to understand her father, understand where he comes from, reach the understanding that I've come to.
But Corrine's friend Barbara sees things differently. She won't ever forgive Dimitrios and believes he gave up all of his rights the day he murdered Lara's mum.
Corrine's not coming back. Lara's got a dead mother and her whole life's been compromised through his actions. I see her as Corrine's daughter and I don't think he's worthy of the right to her in any way at all. I don't think he deserves that.